Hello, my name is Moira Shuri, and I'm the Executive Director of Zócalo Public Square. Welcome to today's event. After a busy election season and a high-tension year for the United States, we at Zócalo are asking the question, what do we do now? At Zócalo, our mission is to connect people to ideas and to one another. Everything we do is free and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and convene events like the one we're watching today. Find out more on our website, zocalopublicsquare.org. As we sort through the events of 2020 and look ahead to what comes next, we need to take stock of where we find ourselves at this moment. Julian E. will be moderating today's discussion with Asha Rangappa. Julian covers national security and intelligence agencies for the New York Times. And he's also reported for the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, and US News and World Report. Over to you, Julian.
Hello, and thank you, Moira. It's an honor to be moderating a Zócalo event for the second time. I want the whole Zócalo team to know that when I get 3 more hosting gigs, I'm going to expect a jacket like the 5-time hosts of Saturday Night Live. The title question for this event, What Do We Do Now?, is the final line of a 1972 Robert Redford movie, The Candidate, a movie almost as old as I am. Redford, if you don't know, plays a candidate who unexpectedly wins a big election and has no idea what he's supposed to do now that he's won. The good news for this audience is that Asha Rangappa, unlike Robert Redford, knows what we do now. She's a senior lecturer at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs and a former associate dean at Yale Law School. Prior to her current position, Asha served as a special agent in the New York division of the FBI, specializing in counterintelligence investigations. You've seen her on CNN, where she's a legal and national security analyst. We're going to look today at what's happened to the national security institutions over the last 4 years and what needs to happen next for the Biden administration. And so, Asha, let's start with your old shop, the FBI. There's no agency more maligned by President Trump. And does that criticism go away when Trump leaves? Or does the criticism that he's leveled at agents, at the former assistant director, charging them as sources of bias and unprofessionalism, does that do long-term damage? What's broken for good?
I don't think it's broken for good, but I think whenever these institutions that we rely on to be nonpartisan and independent get politicized, it's always bad and it takes some time to undo. I think that's especially true for the Department of Justice and the FBI, because the rule of law is, it's as important that the law is perceived as being impartial as the actors within them, actually imparting impartial justice. Also true for the judiciary. So I think rebuilding that sense of legitimacy, which I think will hopefully mean, I think just simply not being the target of vocal attacks by the person sitting in the Oval Office will go a long way. But I think it's going to be a challenge because under a Biden administration, there may be crimes that are uncovered involving people from the prior administration. This once again will place the Department of Justice and the FBI in political crosshairs, even if they are pursuing legitimate investigations. So I think this is going to be a challenge for a little while.
What do you think about whether we have a tradition, right, where we don't, in America, prosecute the prior administration, right? In general, Nixon got a pardon. We don't throw previous presidents in jail. But we've seen a lot of coverage sort of arguing that there should be some robust investigations of what the Trump administration did. What's your position? What do you think? Is that productive for a Biden administration, necessary, or a distraction?
I've come around, I think, on this topic. There was a point where I thought, it could be worth it to, if we could have Trump step down, for example, and agree to walk away in exchange for some immunity, that actually might be the best trade-off for the US, which was, I think kind of the Ford-Nixon approach, that there's additional harm that's done to the national psyche, to our sense of legitimacy by continuing to prosecute that. I think as we've, in the last year, especially under the Attorney General, Bill Barr, I've kind of come around to, I think that there's just too much going on that, really does need to be looked at on so many different fronts. From the policy front, for example, the separating children from their parents, and those, what are the OLC memos underlying that? I mean, that to me is kind of in the realm of when we discovered that the W administration had authorized torture, for example, to possible actual corruption at the personal level by individual people. I think the way to split the baby is for Biden administration to appoint a special counsel. I know we're kind of special counseled out, but I think you really want someone who is insulated from political influence and has a very clear mandate that they follow. I think that's the best that we're going to be able to do, short of just letting it go, which I just don't think is going to be an option.
Nothing triggers President Trump like a special counsel. So, one area of criticism that the Trump administration has leveled at the FBI that has some underlying merit is FISA abuse. The DoD Inspector General found that there were errors made in requesting foreign surveillance warrants on American individuals. What do you think? Should this be something that a new Congress looks at? How important should this be in terms of rebuilding trust in the FBI, or is it really hopelessly partisan at this point and should not be a priority for Biden?
No, I think I think Congress should absolutely look at it, but I think we also have to understand what the nature of the problem is. The Inspector General did find many errors in the FISA application, particularly for Carter Page, in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. I think he did find that those weren't really a result of political bias, which frankly is more problematic because it suggests that it's systematic. And then a broader audit of FISA applications across the Bureau found, various kinds of oversights and errors. I don't want to go down into the weeds of what, to repair, but I think we do need to look at those systemic errors and figure out a way to increase I think the issue is, how do we increase the accountability of agents who are pursuing these electronic surveillance orders and the representations that they make in court. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of bureaucracy that has now been put in between those two ends of the process, right. Which allows things to fall through the cracks, which kind of makes people feel not maybe as responsible for what goes in. And I think that's where we need to look at, because ultimately these are, we're looking at the balance between national security and civil liberties. And in that balance, I think you always want to put the responsibility on the government to be as close to error-free as possible, especially when you have a procedure that's being done in secret and where the accountability is going to be lower than it might be, say, in a criminal process.
So, as you know, Trump has been firing a number of people in this sort of transition period we're in now, certainly a lot of high-profile firings at the Pentagon. There's no other official in his crosshairs more than Christopher Wray. But do you think that Trump will fire him? And if he does, who should Biden look to nominate as a replacement?
So I'm going to give it high odds that Trump fires Christopher Wray. If for no reason, then I think it'll just make him feel better. You know, in the last few months, I think, and I've been relieved to see this, I think Wray has been one of the few appointees, particularly in the national security intelligence community establishment, that has really held the line on the truth. And from a law enforcement perspective, let's remember that Wray is the one who, you know, in front of Congress, pushed back on this idea of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. He said, we investigate crimes, not ideologies, which is true. He's noted that, you know, white nationalism, white supremacy is a rising domestic terrorism threat. He pushed back on the voter fraud narrative. And, you know, I suspect that he has not behind the scenes gone along with, you know, other attempts to shape the narrative. I will say that what we learned from the firing of James Comey in 2017 is, you know, this is, if he does do that, it'll be symbolic. I don't think it will affect the day-to-day, you know, work of the Bureau. Which is quite decentralized, and it happens at the rank and file agent level. I had a debate on this with my colleague Matthew Miller on Twitter. I think that if Wray is fired, that Biden should reappoint him. The FBI director is appointed for a 10-year term. The idea is that the director, barring misconduct or some kind of you know, for cause firing, is going to be there, you know, through administrations, including administrations of different parties, as a way to establish independence and the nonpartisanship of the Bureau. So I think that would go a long way towards reinforcing that norm, that this is one agency where every president doesn't get their guy into the head of the FBI. I think reasonable people could disagree, but I think given that he has not done anything that's, you know, prima facie outrageous, or, you know, I think he holds a lot of respect, I think, within the Bureau, which is the other thing. You really want to keep the people in the FBI, you know, confident that there's going to be stability in their leadership.
So Biden's going to most likely face a Republican Congress. I mean, do you think that, I mean, Wray has been demonized for Trump for months. Would Republicans fall in line with Trump and oppose a renomination, or would they, do you think he appeals to that sort of the inner mainstream Republican in a
it would put them in a pickle, right? I mean, they confirmed him before.
Right.
And again, there's nothing to point to that he's done that is either partisan or, you know, even with Comey, who you could maybe argue had, you know, kind of gone rogue and had not followed Department of Justice policy. There's nothing. I mean, this guy has like been by the book. I think he's been incredibly thoughtful. He's, you know, pursued, you know, many things that I expect the administration probably is proud of in terms of investigative priorities and things like that. So I think it would be tough for, you know, it would be tough for them to justify not confirming him again, which is partly why I think it would be a good test, you know, to see how they would thread that needle if that's what they wanted to do.
So also on the hot seat is Gina Haspel, and I want to turn from the FBI to the CIA and the intelligence community writ large here. The president has been less public, less consistent with his criticism, but he surely has labeled the IC as part of a deep state, and he has had a comfort level with his last two DNIs, who've been way more political than traditional leaders. So how badly politicized do you think the intelligence community, the DNI, the CIA are right now, and how hard is that to undo it?
I think I think interestingly, I think the CIA and the DNI, I think you can write that ship a little bit easier. You know, those are ultimately, I mean, the heads are definitely, they're, you know, clearly political appointees. Their work should not be politicized, but ultimately they are positions that feed into policy. And so, you know, I think we saw, for example, under W, there was some politicization of intelligence in terms of our going to war with Iraq. I mean, we've had the torture debacle, all those things. You know, I think with the right leadership, both in the Oval Office and with these agencies, I think you can kind of reestablish you can right the ship, because I think it's more important what's happening behind the scenes in those cases. Unlike, say, with the Justice Department or FBI, where you're bringing cases into court, you need public buy-in, because that is part of how they are successful. If you have a jury that completely thinks the FBI is corrupt, you're not going to actually, you know, get the bad guy. Whereas I think with the CIA, you know, you want to make sure that things are on the up and up behind the scenes. And I think with the right leadership, they can do that.
So it would be very surprising if Biden, who is somebody in his career who is bought into this idea of apolitical intelligence, would appoint someone in the mode of John Ratcliffe or Rick Grinnell, somebody who's a big partisan defender. But down the line, has the acts over the last year of having a loyalist in this job at the head of the intelligence community, is that going to be tempting for other future presidents, do you think? Will they want to put less of an intelligence professional and more of a sort of reliable political voice, if not at the CIA, then at the DNI?
Well, I think we've definitely seen what happens, and you know, that is possible, and the damage that happens. You know, I think I think the question is, how can we create more checks around that? I mean, theoretically, so first of all, the DNI statutorily is required to have extensive intelligence experience. So, I mean, we've had a president who's completely ignored the qualifications that are even necessary for these positions. And then, you know, our check is supposed to be the Senate confirmation process. So, you know, it's hard because we theoretically have guardrails built in. Those guardrails have just given way. I mean, it's just, we talk about off the rails, like literally the guardrails have not held in a lot of ways. So I think absolutely there's going to be a temptation. And I think it's what we need to do is emphasize it matters who you put into the Oval Office. You know, that the presidency is the most awesome office in the world in terms of the power and influence that it has, not only to shape the course of things that happen in this country, but in the world. And it's very hard to legislate and rein it in, which means you are depending on the character and good faith and good judgment of the person who's in that office to exercise his or her powers appropriately. So I don't know the answer, Julian. I think there's definitely going to be a temptation. I think it's going to depend on the American people understanding the full consequences of what happens when we place someone in, and that next time we may not have the Three Stooges presidency. You know, we may not figure out all of the, you know, the craziness and the bumbling because, you know, of inexperience. There may be shrewder people, smarter people who understand how the guardrails work and how to keep things much more below the surface. So I think it's a concern. It's definitely a concern.
I mean, you've raised some really good points here about how a president who sort of shatters norms is virtually unconstrained. I mean, because we have seen places where the law and the rules have stopped the Trump administration, but where it is something is just a norm, accepted that this is how you do it, he'll plow right through it. But you just, as you point out, it's hard to sort of legislate all these things that are and we're not really having a very quick moving Congress these days. Like it's even more politically divided. So, you know, if you were going to sort of fix some of those norms, if you were going to try to take some norms and make them rules to prevent that sort of a similar experience that we've had from the last 4 years, or that sort of scenario that you just laid out of somebody who is, you know, more sort of bureaucratically competent than the current administration has been at times, what would you do? What are those sort of some of your top examples of norms you would replace with rules?
Yeah, I think one might be to strengthen protections for inspector generals, and in terms of maybe the grounds required for firing them, because the inspector generals are kind of one vehicle by which Congress should come to know about misconduct in the executive branch, and so in that it can exercise its oversight function. And what we saw was basically an attempt to cut that channel off at the knees. Again, by installing loyalists into those positions, or you know, creating dubious legal justifications for not passing on whistleblowing complaints. You know, I mean, I don't think people fully appreciate impeachment happened because the inspector general went ahead and told Congress, or Congress found out about this whistleblower complaint despite the attempts of the Trump administration with the acquiescence of the Justice Department to bury it. So I think the inspector generals are really going to be important.
And then got fired over it, right?
And then got fired over it. Absolutely. It's hard again because, you know, some of these things can be challenged for, you know, on constitutional grounds, because all of these people are in the executive branch, and the president has, under Article 2 of the Constitution, the authority to hire and fire these people. And so, you know, starting to put a lot of constraints on them can be challenging. So, you know, short of creating additional restrictions on firing, I think, you know, including, say, for the FBI director, putting, you know, more grounds as opposed to I just don't like him anymore. I think Congress could also start to take some of its power back. One of the things that we've seen over the last, you know, 4 decades is an accretion of power by the executive branch because Congress has given it away. A lot of powers that belong in the hands of Congress, which has been delegated to the president. So one example is the president's ability to declare a national emergency, which triggers all kinds of other things. Now, to some degree, you have to do this, right? Because, you know, if, say, lizard aliens land on, land in the United States from outer space, there may not be time for Congress to react. You want the president to be able to respond very quickly. This is obviously a fantastical hypothetical, but that power has been given often with very little criteria or guidance in which it can be used. Same thing with the travel ban. The travel ban was issued under delegated authority by Congress that basically kind of gives the power to bar the entrance of people in the interest of national security. So there's not, I think, a clear criteria on which to exercise this. This is not great for America because, Congress can't, has to sit there and imagine every possible scenario in legislating, which then leaves us open in the case of emergencies. But the other option is what we've seen in the last 4 years, is that someone who is willing to abuse the authority can come in and do it if you don't create a narrower space within which he or she can act.
It's not clear to me that the voters will hold the senators who filibustered the lizard alien deportation act accountable or not. We just haven't seen a lot of presidents be willing to give up power. We have definitely not seen even a divided Congress be able to do a lot of legislating. Biden is going to be frustrated, is going to want to use executive orders and the powers he has. But is there anything different about this moment in time that may make him more willing to give up power than other sort of executive branch leaders?
Yeah, and I mean, you observed something great. So presidents of both parties, once they're in the Oval Office, they don't want to be the people in charge of curbing their own authority. Starting from, let's take, for example, the War Powers Resolution, which attempts to rein in the war-making powers of the president. Presidents of both parties have not acknowledged the constitutionality of that, which was passed over Nixon's veto. I think, though, again, given the abuse we've seen, one thing that we're going to see is if the Republicans remain in control of the Senate, they want to see some of the authorities of the president reined in when another party is in power. And so I think with some careful calibration and working with Democrats, Biden could come to agreements on ways to rein in the power of the presidency writ large in ways that, wouldn't tie his hands to achieve the policy things that he wants to do. So, for example, reining in the criteria or basis on which, the president can declare a national emergency, I think could be a good start. That's not something a president does every day, for example. And I think there are other areas that he could work with it. It's definitely counter to their interests, right? Which is why we haven't seen it happen, and why it tends to go the other way.
The NSA, the National Security Agency, the people who do the sort of eavesdropping around the world, are another agency we're talking about today. Trump, there was a Trump loyalist installed as the general counsel there this week, a civil service position, a position that will not necessarily end with the Trump administration. Michael Ellis is a veteran of the National Security Council under Mr. Trump. Is this a problem for Biden administration if Trump is seeding people into the bureaucracy of the national security apparatus? What did you make of that? And is that something Mr. Biden should be worried about?
Yeah, I think we need to keep an eye on it because of the specific people that were put in. Michael Ellis, who was put in into the general counsel's office, over, by the way, 2 career people at NSA in the general counsel's office who I think might have otherwise gotten that job. And he comes in having no experience in NSA and some minimal experience on the National Security Council. He was the one who Alexander Vindman testified moved the Ukraine call to President Zelensky onto the code word server as a way of restricting people's access to it, which is not how you normally, that potentially violates classification rules, for example. So we're seeing somebody who's not really a rule follower. So you have to wonder why is he there, especially in this late stage. And then we see these appointments also of people who have kind of tried to help the president's narrative be put in places at DOD. I would be worried that they are there to basically tamper with the intelligence that is there in one way or another, whether it's to try to conceal it, move it, expose it in ways that create a specific story. But all of that, if that were to occur, it just makes it harder for the incoming administration to come in and sort out what the hell was going on,
You mentioned, made reference to declassifications, this material that has been pushed out by John Ratcliffe, the Director of National Intelligence, over the objections of the NSA. We had some notes about Crossfire Hurricane, the 2016 investigation that the NSA and CIA did not want out. There are reports about potentially more documents coming out. Certainly, the president's son, Don Jr., is on Twitter regularly asking for more material to be declassified and released. You know, what's the objection? This seems important to the president. You know, is there any potential for damage here? Is this just a sideshow? Should one be worried about these 11th hour declassifications?
Yeah, sorry, I got a message that I was signed out of Zoom. I'm still here, right?
I can see you.
Okay, good. So, I mean, it seems to me that the big thorn that the president has had in his side is this idea of the Russian interference in the 2016 election, which I think he believes delegitimizes his win. And also the idea that, you know, his campaign was involved with that interference in some way. The declassification continues to, these selective declassifications, as well as what we saw in terms of the narratives that were promoted through impeachment, through congressional investigations like the ones headed by Senator Ron Johnson, to the discovery of the Hunter laptop, you know, thing in Delaware, is, you know, this constant attempt to displace blame on the 2016 interference from Russia to Ukraine or to some other entity. That is what I think is kind of one of the goals here, is to, before we leave, we're going to make the case that this didn't happen. It was a hoax. It wasn't Russia. It was a 400-pound guy in the basement or Ukraine. Here's my question, Julian, that I find, you know, this is what I don't really get about it. This seems to me that I don't think the president really needs this narrative. I mean, maybe for his own ego, but I think his followers and his supporters believe his narrative anyway.
Right, right.
The person that this all benefits, especially in terms of declassification, is Vladimir Putin. Because when we declassify, you know, intel, stuff that we've learned about, you know, how, or reports that we've gotten, whether it's from human intelligence, signals intelligence, that's not hard for a very sophisticated intelligence service like Russia's to reverse engineer and figure out, you know, who, what, where, when, and dry up our sources who we hope to continue giving us information into the future. It also helps Putin with his public narrative. And this idea that, look, these sanctions are unjustified, you know, Russia is a victim and this, you know, is bullied on the world stage and we don't do these things. So it helps them with their plausible deniability narrative. I think it mostly helps them with identifying sources and methods that we have used and, you know, potentially puts them in danger. So that's what worries me, because I can't see that this is really something that Trump wants. I can see that it could be something that Russia wants very much.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We saw in these earlier declassification of CIA memos references to exchanges between Russians. Now, it was blacked out who the Russians were, but it wasn't blacked out what they were talking about. So presumably the Russian intelligence knows, you know, who was talking, and then you all suddenly told them what you were listening to, and you know, it's meaningless to us, but to them they can go and say, oh, better throw away those cell phones or shut down that computer.
Absolutely. It, you know, and we even saw this with the unmasking debacle when you know, NSA had to when they declassified the list of all the people who had made unmasking requests, which it turned out, by the way, none of those requests were unwarranted or illegal in any way, but it gave, you know, the dates that they were requested. Again, you know, it's not hard to say, like, okay, who was talking to Michael Flynn or on or around these dates that everyone was requesting unmasking information? And once you identify who and on what channels they were speaking to him, you dry them up, they're gone.
Right.
They're not available for collection anymore. And I think, your average person may not see all those downstream consequences, but people like Gina Haspel obviously do. The NSA obviously does. And so that's where I think Trump benefits from getting his loyalists in, because they don't care about those consequences, and they will be able to override objections and take the actions that he wants. I'll just add one more thing. The intelligence assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 election was FBI, CIA, NSA. So if you want three agencies to get on board with "we were wrong," who do you fire and put in place so that you can get the official story that you want, or at least an official statement before you leave office?
I want to go back to something you made reference to at the beginning of our conversation, when you talked about Wray's, pushing back on some of the Antifa requests that President Trump had made. But we also have a case where we're having extremists on both sides really agitated. The NSA director has warned about potential foreign influence to try to turn some of these extremist groups in America violent. Has the FBI done enough to, watch extremist groups that are engaged in criminal behavior? How do we, what should a Biden administration do on this front? It seems like it's potentially both politically fraught, but also very important to address.
It is very important to address. It gets very complicated. We have, and especially the FBI has, a checkered past in terms of investigating organizations that have deemed to be national security threats in the 60s and 70s, for example, communism and leftist groups and draft dodgers. And as a result, there are major barriers in place under the Attorney General guidelines protecting First Amendment activity by domestic organizations. And so, I think the first, thing, and I think it's a good thing, is that the FBI has to sit and watch until there is evidence that this is going to cross the line from speech to criminal activity. Beyond that, though, I think in terms of assessing foreign coordination with some of these groups, I think that once that starts to happen, you can certainly, I think, trigger more investigative activity. And we've done that with certain groups. There have been groups like, for example, Adam Waffen, which is a right-wing national group. I think the base also, or the leader, it's, I think it's started in the US, the leader is in Russia. So I think, we have the legal tools and we have the legal standards in place. What we need is for a president who respects the way that our existing kind of standards and designations work, and are willing to say them out loud when they go in that direction, even if it, it might make people who would otherwise vote for him mad or whatever it is. And I think, leaving it in the hands of the FBI and the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security under trusted professionals to make those calls will be the right thing to do.
So Trump has not acknowledged Biden as president-elect yet. We do not have a formal transition process. Biden doesn't have access to the president's daily brief, the intelligence briefing. How much does that matter? How much is that going to impact an eventual Biden administration? Is it a distraction of a couple of weeks, or could it really be a problem for the next administration?
I think whenever you have a gap, it's a problem, right? I think especially, so here's my main concern, especially from a national security perspective, because we have a president right now who we know, or at least from reporting, does not read the presidential daily brief, who doesn't pay attention to the threats. And so, you know, we're having this incoming person who's not being allowed access to it. So it's basically this vacuum. I mean, in some ways, it's like that's what we've had now and until now. So it's sort of the status quo. But you know, let's take, for example, COVID. I believe the reporting is that came on the radar of the White House and the briefings like as early as like a year ago, like November of last year, right? You're shaking your head. I don't know. You probably know the details better than me.
I think that the November is a little early. I think that reported there's some pushback, but no doubt that it was in the PDB in January, and that there were warnings there, right?
So let's say there's something that's coming on the radar, you know, now, December. I mean, you want the incoming administration to be able to hit the ground, like kind of be able to understand what's happening, figure out, especially if it's something new, like, you know, the pandemic was kind of this new kind of threat, this biological threat that was coming in. So something that's new, you know, it takes time to like think about who are the people that we need to get on board, what are the resources we need to get lined up. You don't want that to happen starting on noon on January 20th. You want people to have been planning for that. And so, you know, that's the problem. Now, how long will he be able to delay this? I don't know. I think he is statutorily required. I think when there is an apparent winner, it triggers the statutory requirement. So, you know, it's tough because I think President-elect Biden is doing the right thing by not trying to litigate this stuff because it only draws attention. You know, is sort of like ignoring the tantrum that the 5-year-old is having and continuing. But I think that you and I discussed this before this started. I'm starting to see signs that reality is setting in. I mean, even just the idea, the floating the idea of running again in 2024 is an implicit concession. If you have a second term, then guess what? You would be ineligible to run in 2024. So if you're talking about running in 2024, then you know that you're not going to be president for the next 4 years. So I'm hoping that this is a temporary thing and that in another week, we'll just be able to move on with, you know, reality.
Well, we have a bunch of great questions from the audience. I'm going to dive in a little early because there's a lot of them and they're good ones that you're going to want to answer. If you do have a question you haven't answered yet, please post it in the YouTube chat. So the first question is about a piece you wrote in the Washington Post about the prospect for a self-pardon for Donald Trump. And, you know, the viewer says it is speculative, but what do you think? Could President Trump give himself a self-pardon?
I would say that depends on whether Trump is going to be a rational actor or a not rational actor. You know, a self-pardon is the validity of one is questionable since it's never been tried. You know, no president has tried to pardon himself. The Constitution gives almost unfettered pardon authority to the president. It doesn't say that a self-pardon is proscribed. However, I think most legal scholars agree that both the history and origins of the pardon power combined with the structure of the Constitution would make a self-pardon invalid. And so I think someone thinking rationally, someone who really wants to make sure that they are protected would not try to do this because it would take time to litigate and challenge it in a future administration. And if he were stripped of that protection, he then is exposed with no way to correct that. So I think that, and of course, I don't know that the president wants to acknowledge that he doesn't have a power because he thinks Article 2 lets him do everything. So he may very well try to do that. I think, though, my personal view is I think we will most likely see him step down at some point. It may be even the day before, inauguration. I don't know how far in advance, but enough time to see Pence take the oath of office. And then he would have the power of the pardon and be able to grant it. And that, I think, would be much more airtight. That could also be consistent with Trump's character in the sense of, I'm done with this. I'm going to walk away. Like, I quit. You didn't fire me. It's not that I didn't win. I just don't want this job anymore. And there's a face-saving way for him to leave and also get someone in to pardon him and also potentially pardon his children or, these other players that have been out there, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, other people. And that wouldn't, I think if Pence did it, I mean, George H.W. Bush pardoned 6 people from Iran-Contra.
Right.
In many ways, he, I don't know that he has a real political future running for president anyway. So, that's what I see.
So there's a couple questions about whether Trump will still get classified access to classified documents after being president. Will he retain his security clearance? And is there anything to stop him from spilling the secrets that he's learned over the last 4 years? Is this a real concern in your mind? What do you think?
I think it's absolutely a real concern. So in terms of his clearance, because I tweeted this too, and then my colleague pointed out, he's like, well, there's nothing to strip. He doesn't have a security clearance, which is important to remember that the president is basically the one person in the federal government who gets access to classified information but doesn't undergo a background check or formally get a clearance because it's basically inherent in the position that he holds. But I think I believe that most presidents normally get, either temporary clearances and access to certain kinds of information because of the idea that given their experience and what they've seen and maybe some of their institutional knowledge, they may be useful in terms of consulting future administrations on potential issues. I don't think that's a role that Trump is really interested in playing, to be honest. And I think, we already mentioned, I don't know that how much he's paying attention to his briefings. How much, and people are both like, well, how much is he really going to retain? Having said that, you still know a lot. I mean, he's been in the room to make decisions, the strike on Soleimani, the, withdrawing of troops. I mean, there is even a baseline level of information that I think would be a gold mine for foreign intelligence services. I used to, I worked with, flipped sources from other countries and, even small little tidbits that for them may be nothing are for us incredibly valuable because they could be a little piece of a bigger puzzle that really helps us. This is why we should be concerned that he's $421 million in debt, and we're not really sure to whom. From an intelligence standpoint, he's vulnerable, and he has valuable information that I think could be that other countries would be very tempted, and I think they would be dumb not to try to exploit.
So we have a couple questions from the audience about the asking how much of the intelligence community is still intact, is there to sort of rebuild from, how deep the damage goes. And also a question on what do you think is the most damage? What's the most politicized? The Pentagon, Department of Justice, the intelligence community? So tackle those two if you want.
How deep do I think the damage goes?
Yeah, is it just at the top, or are we like, do we bring in a group of sort of new agents, officers who have different values than a previous generation because they were attracted, a different kind of person was attracted to the service?
I think that's a great question. I think right now, I think it's mostly the top. I mean, I think if there's one thing we've learned from the last 4 years, it's that the thing that has saved us is our vast bureaucracy. I mean, it was some analyst at CIA who was the whistleblower on this Ukraine call. We've had rank and file agents, continuing investigations, those career prosecutors who resigned when they were like, I'm not doing that. I'm not signing my name to that. So, and I mean, not even to, mention the civil servants, like the poll workers, the, county officials who like help make our election go. Like, I mean, our civil service, our bureaucrats, I mean, these are like the people who are making the country run. I think if Trump were there for another 4 years, I don't think that would be true anymore, at least at the federal level. I mean, this is completely anecdotal and not representative, but just the people that I knew who were in the federal government were like ready to quit. And so I think once you have a critical mass of people exit and then you start hiring new people, you can potentially change the culture of these organizations. And I think right now the culture of those organizations is mostly still nonpartisan. Let's just do our job. Let's, the mission and the Constitution is what's most important. Having said that, as I mentioned before, I think perception is everything in terms of how people perceive of these agencies. And I think the greatest damage that has been done has been to the Department of Justice. Okay. I think that's been, it's just been a travesty.
So one of our viewers has asked you, do you think that some of the primary targets of Mr. Trump's wrath who have been pushed out should be brought in by Mr. Biden as a sort of symbolic restoration of the bureaucracy of nonpartisanship? They mentioned Colonel Alex Vindeman. They also mentioned Andy McCabe, two very different kind of individuals. But what do you think about bringing some of these people who've been pushed out back?
I mean, I think in terms of political appointees, there aren't any that I would really say he has any obligation to bring back, except I think, again, if he were to fire Christopher Wray, but only because of the idea of the 10-year term of the FBI. I mean, otherwise, I think a president does have, they are, everything being normal, can bring in their own people. They are expected to keep on the person that's in the FBI position, which is why I have accepted that. Vindeman and McCabe are a little bit different because they weren't political appointees. I mean, they were career people who got fired.
Right. McCabe needs one more day.
Yeah, and I think that piece is, winding its way through. I think it's still in the courts in terms of whether that firing was political, whatever, the validity of that firing and stuff like that. So, like reinstating them. I mean, I think Alexander Vindeman, yes, because that seemed like clearly a retaliatory, against what our laws, he testified. And you don't, it's retaliation and intimidation. Right. The McCabe thing is harder because I think I do think that was retaliation also. But man, I don't want to open that can of worms of, I mean, because he was in a hugely what, it's not like you're going to hire him back and be like, be an agent in, New York. Like he was the deputy director. He was the guy at the top. So, if you were going to reinstate him, I think you'd have to put him in the top. And then you get into questions of the director of the FBI should be able to choose the people. Right. So I think and then, of course, the whole Russia stuff. And I think, acknowledging the unfairness, I think you create a lot more political stuff that I think the FBI does not need right now. That's where I would be worried.
So another question was, given the sort of deep partisanship in the U.S. Senate, will Biden get anybody through? I mean, Trump has had to use a lot of people in acting capacities. This question said, well, will Biden have to do the same? Will Biden have 4 years of folks in acting jobs? What's your thought?
I really don't know. I'm not, a political analyst, and I don't know how obstructionist the Senate would be. Especially if you were to nominate highly qualified people who obviously knew how to do the job. And, I think Biden, it might force Biden to be more centrist in his selections. I don't know that he would have been otherwise. I don't know where he would go otherwise, but will they obstruct everybody? I don't know. That does open, I think you get to a point where, the question for everybody in government now is, do we want to make norm breaking the norm?
Right.
Is that what you really want? Do you want to, and I think for the Senate, do you want your own institutional power to basically be discarded? Because if you have one more administration comes in that basically says, F you, I don't need you to confirm my people because I'll just make them all acting, and they'll just, I don't need to acknowledge your subpoenas. Like that hurts the Senate. Like that hurts Congress. Like that's their institutional power. So I think now, I'm wondering, are they going to, in the interest of preserving their own importance and relevancy to governing, they too have an interest in performing their job, like doing their job. How that will play out, I'm not really sure.
So one of our viewers has said, hey, well, you haven't talked about the Department of Homeland Security, and they're noting the sort of no ICE, abolish ICE signs you see all over Los Angeles. And they're talking about abuse by ICE and Customs and Border Patrol that have been written about. They ask, should we abolish the Department of Homeland Security and start over? Is this something the Biden administration should take on? Should they do some big reforms, some little reforms? How well is Homeland Security working?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think first, the first order of business is going to be to get to the bottom of some of these policies that were implemented. The legality of them, the children that have been, how we repatriate them. So, I think that has to be the first thing. And then, identifying was this leadership? Was this systemic? Where is this coming from? Now, remember that, DHS, ICE, our Customs Immigration, I'm forgetting all of the different acronyms. I remember when I was in the FBI, it was INS that had, all of these functions. And one thing that I've thought about is, there was some benefit to that. I don't know bureaucracy wise whether it made it too unwieldy, but in many ways, because you had this organization that was both responsible for bringing in the immigrants, giving them the naturalization, oaths. There's part of that is also with the enforcement piece. You create a certain balance of culture, and teasing them out and creating an enforcement only part versus a separate part that brings them in, I think also has affects institutional culture. I haven't studied it, but I think that's where you would need to go. What is the institutional culture here? Has it become so, toxic and dysfunctional and unable to pursue its mission in accordance with the Constitution, that it does have to be reimagined? And it wouldn't be the first time that we've done that. The whole point is it was reimagined after 9/11. Have we faced a significant enough crisis that we need to do that again? I don't know. I haven't drilled down into like my knowledge of these agencies, I wouldn't want to characterize in one way or the other without knowing if it's, I mean, because it was some pretty bad leadership, unfortunately. So it's hard to say.
So we're almost at the end. So we only have a little bit of time for this last question, which is, should the United States, instead of prosecuting people who may have done something wrong during the Trump administration, should we have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to look at abuses, but also to look at where we should have some new rules as opposed to norms? What do you think about a commission idea?
I need to know more about how this would be imagined, right? I mean, you know, after Iran-Contra, you had a Tower Commission, which was charged with looking at what happened in Iran-Contra. So, you know, you could have that. I think the difference here is it's just so much, right? Tower, like the Iran-Contra was like one thing. I mean, it was pretty big and it was pretty bad, but it was like kind of one thing. Whereas I think you have so many things across the board, from, you know, what we just discussed with Homeland Security to emoluments violations to, the sacking of the IGs, the politicization of intelligence, on top of the criming, the like various obstruction of justice stuff. Would you really be able to address that? I would say, and also I should add, the Tower Commission, when it did that, complicated prosecutions later, because often in terms of getting people to testify and giving them immunity, it ended up making throwing out actual criminal prosecutions later on. So you also end up with that complication. I would say that you do the special counsel route. You figure out what actual violations of federal law have been committed. You decide which ones of those you want to pursue. And then, based on all of the things you've uncovered, that could be a basis for a commission, a policy-based commission, to look at, kind of like the 9/11 Commission did, to look retroactively at how did this all go wrong, and then, what are the recommendations that we can do to fix it, as opposed to trying to combine them both into one.
So I think we have to end things here, and I will thank you very much. And our YouTube viewers have sent many notes to you to say how much they appreciate your insights here and on CNN and on Twitter, and they are urging you to keep it up. But I really thank you for this conversation here today. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And I'd like to thank Zócalo as well for giving us this platform, and everyone for watching live and sending in their questions. We hope this sparks many more conversations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Julian. Bye.